Rules. For as long as human civilization has existed, there have been rules and people who wanted to break them. I think of Charlie XCX, Bob Marley, David Bowie, Queen. Them and many others have made tons of money singing about how they want to rebel against the established order. The rules. Rules, they restrict our freedom, don't they? There are so many rules that we don't want to follow. But it's not like we can really throw tantrums and not get funny looks when things don't go our way, can we? The truth is, everyone responds to rules differently. Some people push back on almost every single rule in the book. Of course, I'm not talking about any of you here today. You guys are perfect in basically every way. You are the type that follows almost every single rule, aren't you? It's easier for you, and you realize that they must be rules for a reason, right? I love you, but I know better than that. What is true about every one of us is that at some point, we're going to face rules that we just don't like. Rules that make us feel boxed in or caged. That's where our new series comes in. For the entire month of February, we're going to look at rules from a fresh perspective. Specifically, God's rules. Because when some of us think about God, that's all we think about. A list of rules a mile long that don't seem important or relevant to our lives. But Jesus said there are only two rules that matter most. Love God and love others as you love yourself. In this 4-week series on the book of James, we'll discover that the right rules can set you free. We'll also discover that free people don't dance with danger. They do make decisions that benefit others, and they do give up their freedoms for others. God's people aren't caged, they're free people. Have you ever felt caged by a rule? Like a rule that was restricting your freedoms? Maybe it was a curfew, a dress code, who you were allowed to hang out with, your phone restrictions. Some of you get that phone taken away. That's brutal. Or maybe it was something God said to do or said not to do. One of the most frustrating things about being a teenager is that you often feel stuck between childhood and adulthood, dependence and independence, rules and freedom. And you might think you're ready for more freedom, but there are still a lot of rules and adults you have to listen to in the meantime. So what do we do about the rules we don't want to follow? How do we handle our frustration about not being as free as we want to be? And let's say we decide we're going to go to the Bible for help. Is it just going to tell us to obey and say, yes, sir, and yes, ma'am? End of discussion? I was a band nerd in high school. Marching band, indoor percussion, concert band, percussion ensemble. I was such a band dweeb. And each year in early August, we would start a month-long intense training called band camp. Now, okay, before you laugh at me calling it intense training, let me teach you a lesson right quick. If you've never spent 9 hours a day, 3 to 5 days a week on the bus loop parking lot, smack dab in the middle of August while holding, pushing, or carrying instruments that weigh 30 plus pounds, then you better keep that laughter to yourself. I know most of you wouldn't consider marching band as athletic. My fellow band people, you know. Shout out to you. Anyway, one day we broke for lunch, which was always in the school's cafeteria. In fact, no one was allowed to go anywhere, even if they could drive. On this particular day, however, a few friends and I said, nah, it's a dumb rule. Let's leave. We decided that we weren't feeling the turkey sandwiches and chips anymore. We wanted Wendy's. And nobody was going to stop us because we were seniors, daggone it. We had earned it. We'd earned this. So, when everyone else walked inside, we walked to our cars, and away we drove. 20 minutes later, we returned with our spoils, ready to throw down way too many chicken sandwiches, when we were met by our band instructor. To say he was unhappy would be the understatement of my lifetime. He was livid. He said some choice words that day, which I'm not going to repeat here, but it was not pretty. Honestly, at the time, I knew I wasn't doing the right thing. But in the moment, I thought the rule was stupid. I could legally drive, I wasn't breaking the law, we were only going to be gone for a few minutes. And even knowing that the Bible contains passages about submitting to authority, I did it anyway because I felt so trapped by what I thought was a dumb rule. As I mentioned at the top, some of us feels like God's rules can be binding. I get that. Especially during the time of your life right now. You're fighting for freedom and independence. So God can seem like just another person telling you what to do. Fortunately for us, there was once a guy named James. Everyone say hi to James right now. Hi, James. James wrote a book in the Bible that has a lot to say about rules. Oh, and I guess I should mention he had a famous brother, Jesus. And after he rose from the dead, Jesus, James dove headfirst into spreading the good news of his brother. James even became the leader of a church in Jerusalem, a faith community made up of Jewish people who began to follow Jesus. James grew up in a Jewish culture with lots of religious rules. There were obvious rules that we still follow today, like don't kill anyone. But there were hundreds of other rules too, like, don't wear clothes made of more than one kind of fabric. If you find an ox on the side of the road, stop what you're doing and take it back to its owner immediately. Gotta check that collar. And say goodbye to eating bacon. That was considered unclean. That actually is still true among some Jewish communities today. And maybe it seems weird to you that God would give all of these rules, but they did have a purpose. Some rules kept the Jewish people safe and healthy. Others set them apart from other nations. And others still taught them how to live peacefully with one another. And many rules helped them connect with God. These rules served a purpose, but after Jesus showed up, the Jewish people who followed Jesus began to realize that maybe it wasn't so complicated. Because Jesus had made things right between them and God, they weren't required to follow all of these rules to the letter anymore. Or were they? Fortunately, James wrote us a letter to help explain. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and, after looking at himself, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but actually doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. So let's break this down. All right, James says a few things in this passage, and I want to take them piece by piece. The first thing is, do what God says. If you've ever been told, stop arguing and do what I say, then maybe that's the tone you hear in this passage. But that's not what James was doing. He isn't telling us to be quiet and stop eating bacon because God said so. That's not the kind of law James means. So what law is he talking about? The second thing James says is God's word helps us see ourselves clearly. Like a mirror. The rule don't eat bacon doesn't show me how much or who I am, other than the fact that I love bacon. So what is James talking about? How do God's laws help us see ourselves more clearly? The third thing he says is following God's law gives freedom. How is this possible? Don't laws keep you trapped and controlled? How can a law set you free? Well, to fully understand the law James is referring to here, we need to hear from his more famous brother. See, when Jesus was still on earth, he went out of his way to sum up or complete all of the old rules that Jewish people had been following up to that time. Jesus debuted this summary when he was being interrogated by religious leaders who really loved rules. These leaders were passionate about following every detail of the Jewish law, thinking it would somehow make them right or holy and loved by God. So when these leaders asked Jesus to name the most important law of God, they were expecting him to say something they already knew. But Jesus gave them something they hadn't heard before. He said that the two most important rules are to love God and to love others as yourself. He said that when we follow these two rules in every single area of our lives, we're fulfilling the purpose of all of the other rules, every rule God ever made. You see, when we love God and love others, we are doing what God says. Love is how we do something about God's word, rather than just hearing it. We also see ourselves more clearly. Like a mirror, the command to love God and others shows us just how well we're following God's law. Even if we're following every rule exactly, if we're not loving God and others, we're not following God's law. The third thing is we find freedom. The religious leaders at the time believed you had to follow hundreds or even thousands of rules in order for God to love and accept you. But Jesus came to free us from that. With Jesus' 2 commandments here, 2 things are true. 1, we don't have to do anything in order to keep God's love for us. We're already loved. That's not going to change. And 2, we don't have to follow thousands of rules if we just follow 1. Love. Ultimately, what I want us to understand today is that God isn't about giving us rules that keep us feeling like prisoners. The rules God gives are designed to set us free. Free from trying to earn His love, free from trying to be perfect, free from trying to follow a long list of rules, and free to love and be loved by the God who made us. And the key to all of this is the rule of love. When we follow it, we discover that the right rules can set us free. So what? Can we stop obeying our curfews? Should we ignore the school dress code? Can we do whatever we want? No. You see, would God still love you if you did whatever you wanted? Sure. Although He'd eventually get angry, and that's a topic for a different day. But if we actually did whatever we wanted, would we be loving God and others? No. See, when I decided the rules of band camp didn't apply to me, I didn't hurt anybody, I didn't break any laws, but I blatantly ignored a rule that wasn't there to keep me captive. It was there to make sure I was safe. Had we gotten in a car accident or something like that, no one would have known where we were, and the repercussions of that could have literally been deadly. Even though I felt trapped by the rule then, it's a rule I would uphold now for any of you if we went somewhere together, and it would be for your own good. Jesus' rules to love God and to love others, they do the same thing. They guide us to live our best lives possible, and they ensure we're on the path to freedom. How do they play out in our everyday lives? Well, first, let's talk about something we can all relate to, whether you're following Jesus or not. Then we'll talk about what it means for our relationship with God. So let's start with loving others. How does this play out in our lives? We've mentioned a lot of rules that feel restrictive, unreasonable, and unfair. But what if we thought about them differently? Instead of telling our parents, this curfew is stupid, what if we ask, how can I love my parents better? Maybe coming home earlier lets them go to sleep instead of staying up late and worrying if you're safe. Instead of thinking, it's fine if I text while driving, what if we asked, how can I better love the people around me? Following these laws is a simple way we can protect others from harm. And instead of deciding, the church is wrong, sex isn't a big deal, what if we asked, how does it mean to truly love the people I date? Maybe loving someone means being kind, selfless, patient, and wise, rather than doing whatever we want to do in the heat of the moment. Now let's talk about loving God. Jesus gave us the law of love for a reason that's bigger than just being kind to each other. Above all, Jesus wants us to love God. So, if following God ever makes you feel caged instead of free, what if you asked, how do God's rules help me love God more? How do they help me stay close to God? How do they give me a chance to love God by loving others? How do they give me a chance to trust and obey God, even when I don't understand? Over the next few weeks, we're going to dive into that. We're going to talk about the relationship between rules and freedom. But we needed to start here with the law of love. God's law sets us free to love God, others, and ourselves. God's law helps us see that no matter what we've done, God's love for us, it never fails. Although there will always be rules we don't like, don't understand, or don't agree with, the right rules can set you free. And according to Jesus, the greatest rule is love.